We need a corporate revolution now, or maybe even yesterday, because current ways of dealing with so much work stress and continuous change are just not sustainable. To survive and thrive, work and workplaces, as we have always known, has got to change, and soon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, A Corporate Revolution, where we learn from leaders and teams thriving in corporate chaos. My name is Sabrina Sauja. I'm a certified leadership coach and team consultant. Hi, Ankush. Welcome to the episode today. I really appreciate you taking the time from a busy, hectic week to talk to me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
So let's jump in. Why don't you introduce yourself in any way that you want to?
I am Ankush Chawla. I'm a senior manager at Deloitte, and I run the automation and AI business for internal purposes. And in doing so, it's interesting that our teams are spread across multiple geographies, primarily India, Canada, and Chile. So working with those teams and then taking the AI forefront in terms of building solutions for IT and our business. That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so in terms of process optimization. But AI kind of takes a lead at that and takes it forward. So
Yeah, I mean AI is the big thing now, right? It's been for a while, but it will be for the next 20, 30 years as well, I guess.
for sure. I mean, AI has been big, but just as you know, the advent of ChatGPT and other tools have really accelerated it, and the amount of updates and advancements we're getting now is way faster than before.
That's true. And we'll get a little bit deep into that as we talk, because I think you bring up a good point. The change is so much and so intense, and I don't think we've ever experienced this level of change before. But let's talk about you a little bit more. What key experiences from any point in your life has shaped how you lead now?
This is interesting. So specifically for me, I joined my first organization right out of college, and I worked with a company where it was my first move into the corporate world, and I started to learn how to navigate this space. But at the same time, I met leaders where I learned from them and multiple leaders in the past. Something that I do want to specifically mention is people who grow from ground up have a very different take on how the organization works in terms of the development teams, in terms of the business teams, and everybody who's involved, because there are two primary paths that I've seen in my career is people who join as a most junior level and then grow into those management positions and then leadership positions, and then the other ones who are right off the bat of a good fancy MBA and would join the management position. So I do feel that there's a significant difference in the way those people lead. Not saying one is good or the other is bad, but just so the understanding of both of these paths is very different. And once you've handled the problems at junior levels, you tend to empathize more with your teams, and the way you approach problems is can be very different compared to somebody who's coming in from a fresh, more theoretical perspective.
Where do you fall?
Yeah, I fall in the first bucket. I've spent a lot of time growing ground up, and actually, that's the part that I really like, specifically because it keeps us more grounded. There's this chart that keeps floating around on LinkedIn. It's more like an iceberg. So managers only see 4% of the problem. The middle managers see 10 to 20% of the problem, and the development teams see all the problems. So if you're coming from ground up, that's when you're able to understand what could the potential issues be and what the actual teams are struggling with in terms of taking softwares or products through the landscape and actually releasing to the customer. So from that perspective, again, it makes you more humble. It makes you more understandable and brings together a culture of understanding. So that's what I promote and prefer. And again, to your first question, yeah, I fall in the first bucket.
Yeah, I really like you bringing up that difference, because there's definitely a difference, and that empathy part and the grounding is so key, right? And I didn't know that stat, by the way, right? At the top only see 4%. And I'm not surprised just based on my experience and what I hear from clients. But it's good to have a number. So there are lots of benefits to being a leader who has grown in the same industry or the same organization. Do you see any limitations or disadvantages to that as opposed to getting someone from the outside?
Definitely. There are disadvantages. I like this word. It's called being institutionalized. So when you grow in an organization, you tend to adapt to things if you're not challenging everything. And over a period of time, you often get institutionalized where you kind of adapt to how the organization moves. So this is precisely a problem that only new blood, fresh set of eyes can bring in. So this is the time when there is a need for external point of views to come into the organization to break those barriers. So because we eventually fall into those existing patterns of delivery cycles that we may not end up seeing if we work in a particular environment for way too long.
Yeah, that's true. I think maybe that's why leadership teams should be balanced between both types of leaders, right? People who've been there so they can empathize and know the journey and also like have a lot of depth of knowledge of how the organization works, but also new blood to challenge that. But I think it's all about balance in some
Yeah.
ways. So let's talk about a high performing team. Your personal definition based on what you've seen with teams so far. What's the definition? And also how would you measure if the team is high performing?
So it's fairly simple, and I'll just wrap it up in three words, but I will explain it after. It's about getting things done. So and it's an attitude, and it's a culture. So every team is faced with multiple problems throughout their projects, problems, teams, processes, whatnot. If the team is dedicated to shipping things or getting things done regardless of those challenges, that's what I call as a high performing team, because there is no project in the world where I would say it would just go like a breeze, smooth, no issues, nothing.
Sure.
So problems exist everywhere. There are ways to handle it, and a high performing team will find creative solutions to those to deliver things to the customer as promised. So that's the definition of a high performing team. The other key piece that I do want to mention here is a high performing team is not necessarily a team that combines all the people with the best merit in the world together. It's more of an attitude. It's more of a can do. And this is often an example I discuss with my team that if we are in the software business, but tomorrow somebody asks you to do a construction project, what will your answer be? And there are only a few possibilities there, right? Like, so if you can say, no, I'm not an expert in this, please go hire a construction expert to do it. That's one way of handling it. But the other is the answer is always yes, I can do it, given I need time, money, and resources. So that's the can-do attitude, regardless of your skill set. If the team has the ability to explicitly call out what do they need to get things done, they can flip it back to the person who's asking for it. And it is actually the responsibility of the management to make sure that those resources are available to the team to be able to deliver something. So from that perspective, it's simple, like getting things done, and it's actually a can-do attitude that distinguishes high-performing teams from others.
A lot of what you said resonated a lot with me, especially like the can do attitude. And I think, especially given the area you work in, emerging tech, I think it is really important because it's hard to be an expert on something that's continuing to change. So, this can do attitude, what resonates for me, I'm pulling from my coaching world, is a growth mindset, asking the right questions to get things done and not having a limit on what you can do or what the team can do. What's the difference you see between people who have that attitude and don't? Like what do you think leads one person to one camp over the other?
I think it has to do more with the personality and the experiences. If you've had a good boss who's an enabler, who's a true leader in its sense, then you have that sense of achieving everything and everything in the world is possible. if you have your leadership support. It's typically the definition between a leader and a manager. And we all know the definitions of what's a good boss, what's a bad boss. If things are just being thrown at you without the right level of support that you need, and your queries are not being answered, or you're not being set up for success, then you will eventually fall into a bit of a negative zone where you will find it very hard to say yes to everything because you're not supported. But on the other side, if you're actually in a culture that you feel supported in and you are given all the resources to get the job done, then that triggers the can-do attitude. And it's also the examples around you. So it has more to do with the culture and the people that kind of promote that level of thinking to be able to infuse that in an individual rather than, yeah, very blindly saying if something is possible or not. Like, I'm a true believer that everything is possible. It's only a matter of time and money. So if you're given enough time and enough resources, you should be able to deliver everything in the world.
Yeah, I agree 100. You can do anything if you want to do it, if there is a desire to do it as well. And so what I'm hearing is a leader has a huge role to play in creating or even nurturing this can-do attitude. And the easiest or the best way to do it is through supporting your team and individuals, right? And that support can mean like different things. But you did say giving them what they need. I think part of it is also pushing back and managing the manager's manager, the leader's leader. What do you think gets in the way from for leaders who want to give that support but feel trapped between the team and their manager?
So again, it's the boss's boss, right? So it has to be a chain of leaders. So the boss should also feel supported from his leaders. It's a tree-like structure. Obviously, every organization is more like a pyramid. If and this is something very interesting. I firmly believe that we are an average of 5 people we spend most time with, and we eventually turn into either similar to our existing boss or an exact opposite of our existing boss. So it's a choice if you like your boss, or but eventually we carry a lot of attributes from our existing network. So from that perspective, I think it's fairly important that you feel supported from your boss, and it's a top-down culture rather than a bottoms-up push.
Yeah, that's a really good point because we talk a lot about like bottoms up and top down, right? Like decision making, what's the best way to do that? But I think when it comes to supporting the team, it's very much a top down thing,
Yeah, 100%.
right? Yeah. Okay. So that was your definition of a high performance team. And the way to measure it basically is by what they get done, right? How are they hitting their goals?
Yep.
Okay. What do you think are the top three challenges in the corporate world right now? Taking into again, like your specialty of the emerging tech scene, also the multiple geographies you work with, and I believe some of the work is remote as well. So putting all of that into context, what do you think are the top three challenges?
For the challenges, I think it again comes down to the culture, and specific challenges, if I was to mention, would be people who are not asking questions. So that's a big red flag that they don't feel supported, and it's a common challenge that when you enter a meeting, only like 3 or 4 people out of say 10, or maybe 1 or 2 are speaking or leading, or the boss is speaking, but other people are just listening in and simply doing the work. So that's in my opinion, like that's a red flag. It's not something that's good. Meetings should be collaborative, meetings should be more democratic, and if the team feels pressured about anything, they should not feel the fear of that delivery if they see the immediate roadblocks. So second is, if the timeline or the pressures are too high, it's speaking against the boss, right? So, how to push back if you are lower in the chain of that corporate ladder? How do you push back against somebody who's higher? So that would be another one. The second is more around the egos that are at play, because we all play professional roles, and the current world that we are in, I think egos play a big role in terms of people who are more experienced and have a definitive way of working versus somebody who's just a recent grad. If some if for some reason the grad is unable to fall into that set pattern, he may feel that there are other egos at play that are pushing the solution, whereas he might bring in a more creative solution to it. So everybody comes with an ego to some extent. It's good, like self-respect is good, but high egos, I think, are kind of disrupting the balance. And then the last one I would say is more creative thinking. So again, going back to our first question of being institutionalized, once we get into the rhythm of our existing cycles of delivery, then we stop thinking creatively. And that's where the fresh infusion or fresh set of eyes do help. So I think those are the common challenges that I see organizations face. Now, coming to your geographies part, it's actually very different between how we perceive uh, each of these geographies to be delivering on those specific solutions and how people are tuned to it. If you've been in a more back-end style role, there's a chance that you don't understand the front end or the client side of the business. And same goes vice versa. If you're only on the client side, you hardly understand what does it take to make the back end flow. So from that perspective, I think if a geography specializes in one role, that kind of creates a barrier in terms of understanding what the full picture is. Same thing, it may not be one specific geography specializes in one thing or the other, but if there are silos of specialized knowledge, they do create barriers, and it kind of becomes hard to manage those from a delivery lens.
So the creative thinking or the need for more of that, I know you have to do it a lot in your role and you have to get your team to do it too. But you're also somebody who came from the ground up. How do you intentionally build creativity for yourself and for your team? Are there any practices you
Yeah, so the way to think about this is there's a concept, and this comes from my home country called domestic engineering, and this is just getting things done in the most straight line possible fashion by not thinking of the systems around it. So first, let's identify what the problem is and what the simplest solution should be, and then identify what are the roadblocks in an organization to get past those. I think that's the way to simplify creative thinking in terms of getting the job done with the most straight line path possible. The other way is because you already know what roadblocks you're going to hit in an organization, you often get stuck with, okay, if I do this, then I'm going to get stopped there. If I do that, I might get stuck there. So I think just being focused on the solution does help a lot. And having the big picture in mind in terms of what needs to be done and then understanding the organizational challenges does help there. The other piece I'd say is reading, especially in the AI space. As things evolve, specifically in the technology world, the technology becomes obsolete very, very quickly. And just making sure you understand the new landscape and having that attitude, this is maybe something that is a better approach than the last time. And then understanding how the landscape is evolving is also the key to surviving in this, but also to maintain the creative thinking and ways to navigate a space. Oftentimes, in my organization, we have people who specialize in specific tech stacks or roles and whatnot. I think that's a barrier eventually because every technology gets obsolete. If we stay kind of neutral to the technology, whatever we are delivering, and start to explore other stacks as well, I think that keeps your mind open to building creative solutions rather than specializing in your own that you studied in or have worked in the most in the recent past.
Right. So something that really I want to pull out in what you said is creativity and simplicity, keeping things simple or at a foundational level are key. Right? They support each other. If you overcomplicate a solution or anything, right, a system, it takes away from creativity instead of letting us be more creative.
You've nailed it.
Good. The other thing you mentioned, like reading and researching and also going wide versus specializing, because creativity is the coming together of different areas in some ways. You find a solution to a tech problem by looking at an architectural thing. That's one definition of creativity where you bring things together. I want to go a little bit deep into, and this goes to the rapid change you mentioned at the beginning. As things change so much, and if we also have to be wide to be more creative, that's a lot of research, a lot of things to keep up with, I think, right? Everything's
So
changing. Like, how do you manage that?
yeah, there's a simple way of doing it, right? We can't keep up with everything that's going on. It's
Yeah.
simple. Like there's so much going on. The thing that helps with this is what is the problem that you're trying to solve? If you're able to solve that problem, then that's the only milestone you need to achieve. And one key piece that I'd mention here is if you're able to define your problem, your 50% of your job is done. It's the clarity, and you don't need to keep up with all the technologies that are getting updated. You just have to focus on the user. Again, studies 101, right? Consumer is king. Focus on the user, focus on the problem, and just solve that problem. What technologies or ways you find to solve it can be anything and everything, so stay open to that, but stay laser focused on the consumer's problem. I think that gets us the job done rather than being married to, okay, this is the only thing I specialize in, and I will kind of over engineer everything to use this technology to solve for the problem. So having that focus on the customer really helps.
Yeah, that again goes to simplifying things, right? You focus on the problem and then everything that you need to solve it versus looking at other things. So like a singular focus. There's actually a book, I can't remember the title, that talks about focusing on the problem and just about that. Okay. So let's talk about the other challenges you mentioned as well. The first one you said was like people not asking questions or participating, and then the way to push back and how it can be difficult for a lot of us, especially in a corporate world where there is hierarchy, there are performance evaluations. In those two things, how much do you think is individual related issues? So what I'm trying to say is like people not asking questions. Sometimes it's a meeting, right? I've been in meetings in my corporate world where I haven't asked questions, although I might have wanted to. And part of it is my confidence or lack thereof. Part of it is perhaps the leader or the context or the organization. The way I look at it, there's a me piece, right? There's a leader piece for sure. And there's a culture/organization piece. How do you see those two challenges in context of your experience and also these three levels or lenses?
For the individual piece, every individual needs to figure it out. And I'll mention a few things. Say, extroverts never hesitate to speak out loud in meetings. And so it's mostly for introverts, right? So when they're thinking too much within their own brain and then they don't want to speak it out because maybe their idea is not fully baked or they're shying away from the people or the public space that they're in. So from that perspective, it's fairly acceptable to not speak. You don't need to speak within those meetings, but you can do a quick one-on-one follow-up with the leader after the fact. That's one approach. The other is you can send an email to the person who was leading the meeting to just convey your thoughts. This serves dual purposes. One, you don't have to change being you to just fit to the organizational standards because you will thrive best in your own pace.
Yeah.
So find your way of communicating that rather than being just pushy about, yeah, I need to ask questions in those public meetings and whatnot. So that's on the individual. From a leader perspective, the leader should be open to hearing things. Like active listening is one of the key things that I think every leader should have. And he or she should give the room to communicate the message in an omni-modal fashion. Like it need not end within the call. It can obviously be communicated outside, and the world is not going to end in 30 versus 35 minutes, right? So from that perspective, the leader has to give that space to the people so that they're able to speak out. And Oftentimes, if people are getting pushback, say, for example, if you question a thought in a meeting and the leader kind of pushes back on that, that's actually a bit demotivating from a leader perspective. So, one solution that I typically follow in this is a leader should praise in public and push back in private. So, very simple approach. If you have any feedback for anybody, just praise in public, say nice things. If you don't have nice things, don't say anything. But when there's any feedback to be sent, do it in private so that the person knows and doesn't feel bad in a public setting. So this also makes sure that the environment of the team stays positive, and we are ready to ignore some of the acceptable mistakes and not humiliate anybody in a meeting setting. So that's on the leader, and the third is the culture. Depending on how the leader is and what practices the leader encourages on, it kind of falls back, it trickles down to everybody on the team, and that kind of makes the culture. So if the leader stops anybody on the team who is kind of being pushy or being or giving feedback publicly, it's the best practices that you want to relay to everybody in the team, and then one by one it becomes a chain, and that becomes a culture for an organization. So that's how I would put it. Different ways to solve for it, but it essentially comes down to the specific individual versus leader versus organizational gaps.
Yeah. For different people, like the contribution from individual versus leader versus organization might be different, right? The split may be different. But I heard something there in what you said. The leader seems really important, even more than the org culture, because there are so many kind of subcultures in organizations, right? And that is set by the leader. So there is almost a little extra responsibility on the leader in this context. What about the egos and kind of having too much of it? How can a leader solve for that?
Egos is kind of very personal. It's very hard to change because you're kind of shaped by your life experiences outside the work as well. Typically, the way I like to look at things is more so detaching the person from the situation. So we all act differently in different situations. And if we need something to blame, let's blame the situation, not the person. Because given those circumstances, maybe there was no other way out for that person to operate. So from that perspective, if we start looking at situations in isolation and try to find the most optimum solution to it, we can get rid of the ego problem fairly quickly. But if we continue to see who was the face behind the situation and what decisions were taken, then it's going to carry over and kind of continue on that path, which is not so ideal.
Yeah, the detaching the situation or the even the action from the person, and really that in itself creates a lot of safety, right? For a team to know that, okay, this is not me who is being criticized, but it's just the action I did. They say we are all trying the best we can with what we have in any given moment, and it's true. I think 99.99% of the time for everyone. If no one is trying to do something wrong on purpose or even something tangentially wrong, right? Okay. The other thing you mentioned was about the geographies and not having visibility to the end-to-end process based on where you are in the organization or your experience. How does that get solved? Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think it's more so just bringing the teams together and balancing the act. Specifically to the geography example, if we have backups in a parallel geography, just like we would just set up our power systems or whatnot. Also, having a backup in a different geography does help because it kind of brings a more hedged approach to delivery. Also, including your team members in bigger meetings and communicating the end goal is very key. Specifically in terms of the IT industry, I can say we play very specific roles, and we are only focused on our job that we want to do, but we miss out on giving details or full length background because of a lack of time. If we start involving those people and just giving them a little more background, then I think it does bring in that big picture context, and the outputs are significantly better, exponentially smarter, if just by giving that extra background so that the last user in the chain understands what was the intent of the first user.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's telling them why what they do matters or why you change. It's just because otherwise, just telling people what to do doesn't go down well.
Yep.
Right? We all want to know how our work contributes to the larger goal or the project. Okay, so we're talking about challenges, and I brought in different questions on the solutions. Anything else that is top of mind as we talk about challenges and solutions that we haven't covered?
No, I think if we have time, let's just reiterate on the situation versus people thing. It's very important and very humane that we push for, so that we're able to isolate any problems specific to those situations and the decisions that were taken. So my last question
Is what do you think is the most immediate thing that needs to change in the corporate world, maybe based on what we've discussed so far, or anything new that you're like, okay, this is really pressing and needs to change? What is that thing? And then what can individuals do towards facilitating that change?
one thing that I think is missing in the corporate world, it's primarily run by the business, and the humanity aspect often takes a backseat. So I think once we understand the big picture and we start to ask for things that are more reasonable and more humane, then I think that is something that can be done at an individual level, can be done at a team level, and just respecting each other, right? So making sure that we work together, and at the same time, if the team is happy and if we all feel supported, then the results are also going to be better, which is kind of counterintuitive if we start to feel that if we just put in more hours, we'll get better output. So
Hmm.
the quality of the output does depend on people and not the hours. And how the people feel about those goals is something that comes from being human and not being very money focused.
So I just wrote down more humanity versus more time or more hours for
Yeah.
individuals as a takeaway.
Yeah, or like corporates are very focused on the money and the ROI. I think if we follow the human route, the ROI is going to follow automatically. But if we follow the ROI, the humanity may not.
And I really like that you pointed out that humanity is something that we can control, right? We don't need a manager to be on board. They may be not. It's really in those one-on-one interactions. It's your everyday stepping into a little bit more of that and seeing what that looks like. And seeing that that converts into dollars eventually. Okay, so if anyone wants to chat more with you and maybe go deeper on something we touched on, is LinkedIn the best way to get in touch?
Absolutely. I think LinkedIn is the right way to get in touch with me. I'm Ankush Chawla, fairly easy to find.
I will also link it wherever I post this. Okay. So Ankush, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I felt like we went a little bit in different places, but I really was curious and wanted to dig deep into some of the things you said. I took a lot of notes. So I really, really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and I am very grateful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and took away something you can easily implement, because that is the goal here. Please subscribe and let us know if you have any questions or if you have additional tips and strategies, so we can all learn from each other and ignite this corporate change or revolution together.